If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Later in the hour, we'll talk with State Senator Karla May about her bid to become the Democrat who takes on GOP U.S. Senator Josh Hawley in the fall. But first, Missouri Congresswoman Cori Bush is no stranger to confronting powerful political and civic institutions. After all, Bush challenged and eventually defeated Congressman Lacy Clay in 2020, and before that became well known in St. Louis for her time in the protest movement that arose after Michael Brown's death in Ferguson. Now Bush is facing another challenge on August 6th. He's trying to outflank St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell and former State Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal in a nationally watched contest for Missouri's 1st Congressional District seat. Joining us now is Congresswoman Cori Bush, who represents all of the city of St. Louis and parts of St. Louis County in the U.S. House. Congresswoman, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thanks for having me again, Jason.
So you have not always seen eye to eye with President Biden, and now some of your colleagues are calling on him to leave the presidential race. Do you think that he should remain the Democratic nominee?
So right now, just like with everything else that we do, we're listening to what the community is saying. We're monitoring the calls that are coming into our office and to the St. Louis office as well as the D.C. office on what our constituents are saying they want to see and how they want me to approach this. So I have not come out publicly for or against. I've had talks, been in talks with leadership, been in talks with our Democratic caucus, as we've all probably seen and heard play out over the last week. There have been multiple conversations from the Congressional Black Caucus to the full Democratic caucus and many others. And so now I will say, though, that up to this point, and maybe this will help us to get other calls in too, but up to this point, 100% of the calls into our office has been asking me to ask the president to not run in the election for president for the next term. So, but we're still listening.
Do you think he can win?
If the Biden campaign, if they're listening to what the voters are saying, actually listening and making the structural changes needed to be able to push a win, and also it's up to if that message resonates. If the Democratic Party, we have to make sure that the message is getting out, and that has been something that we've talked about for a long time.
So let's get to your campaign. If I had to boil down the argument against your reelection, it's this. Your detractors contend you put a lot of energy into advocating for issues that you care about, but you haven't been able to achieve significant policy results or bring back significant policy wins to St. Louis. Why are they wrong?
They're wrong, first of all, because I walked in the door. My third day in office was the insurrection. So that has been the climate of this Congress. Even though when I walked in, the House, we did have the Democrats did have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, but we were in a House where there was a big rift between pushing President Biden's agenda and then pushing an agenda that was a little more to the right of President Biden. And so there was a lot of push and pull, but we did have wins. We pushed for amendments that would bring forth signage for Coldwater Creek, something that had been the advocates have been pushing for 30 years. We were finally able to get a bill passed to do that. We 25 pieces of legislation we were able to pass through the House. I have, in some of my bills, actually, because they weren't able to pass through both houses, the president folded them into executive order. So, in his executive order. So, like what, for example? Like for one that I'm really, really proud of is the Environmental Data Mapping and Justice Act. So, this particular bill we understand that Justice 40, that making sure that the communities that need the investment to fight the climate crisis is important. But how do we make sure that those communities get that direct investment and they get enough of what's needed? So I along with Senator Markey, we decided to put forth
who's a senator from Massachusetts.
Senator from Massachusetts, yeah. So Senator Markey and I, we worked on a bill to go ahead and put together an algorithm for the administration to be able to use to make sure that they have something to a guide. And the president really liked our bill, and so he made sure that bill was able to move forward.
So you have put out publicly that you have delivered $2 billion
Yes.
to the St. Louis region. And I got a spreadsheet from your office. A large percentage of that is for your yes vote for the American Rescue Plan, which brought in hundreds of millions of dollars to St. Louis and St. Louis County. And again, your detractors would say you're trying to conflate money your office personally secures through the earmarking process, which you have direct control with something like the American Rescue Plan, which is usually done by a formula or is directed by the executive branch where you don't have direct control. What would you say to that contention?
I would say that they are wrong.
Okay.
And I would say that they are wrong because prior to the American Rescue Plan, there was the CARES Act. We received a little less than $40 billion through the CARES Act under Donald Trump. When I took office, when the American Rescue Plan was on the table, our office decided to read the whole bill. And in the bill, it speaks about the algorithm. And we understood that the algorithm would not, it just didn't seem like it would give St. Louis the investment that it needed. And actually, I got some of that idea from our mayor, Tashara Jones, from her father, Vervis. And so we went and we looked at the algorithm, and then our office worked with the committee and through the Treasury to make changes to that algorithm so that St. Louis could get a different investment, a bigger investment, because it's what was needed. And so instead of getting under $40 million like we received before, $500 million for St. Louis City and a little under $200 million for St. Louis County. I think that's a big difference.
This race is getting a lot of national attention, primarily because of the assumption among national pundits that it will be a referendum on your criticism of Israel. To what extent do you think what is happening in Gaza will be a determinative factor to whether you win re-election or not?
So the thing is, there is deceit happening right now, and that's what really upsets me about what's happening in this race. So if the reason why Wesley Bell decided to run for this seat, which initially he came out and said it was because I called for a ceasefire in Gaza, and he accepted the endorsement of AIPAC,
which is, by the way, American Israel Public Affairs Committee.
Yes. And he has accepted their endorsement. They have a PAC called United Democracy Project, which so many of you have probably received many, many mailers, and you've seen all the ads. That is AIPAC's political arm. He came out and said he's running against me because of that issue. Since then, he does not talk about that issue. Since then, United Democracy Project, the videos that they put out, all of the ads, none of them reference Gaza at all. So the thing is this: why are they not talking about that? Is it because this is the president's position for a ceasefire now? Because the president says this is what he wants? And so I'm really pissed off that there is this deceit happening, because if you believe that's why you needed to run, then why aren't you running on that?
Well, I have a theory. It's because there's both through polling and anecdotal evidence, i.e. me talking to black voters, it has been documented that African-American voters, which makes up a plurality of your district,
Yes.
do not vote for somebody based off their positions on Israel.
Right.
And I think that's why this race may be different than Jamal Bowman.
Yes, absolutely.
Am I wrong on that?
No, you are 100% right. And in all of the conversations I've been having, that has been a constant. And so the thing is, well, then why is he actually running? If your real reason for running was because I called for a ceasefire, but that's not what you're running on, then you are deceiving the people. Make your ads about Israel, because that about standing 100% with Israel. If that's what you say, because my stance is all people across this globe deserve safety. We need to fight anti-Semitism and anti-Palestinian hate wherever it arises. So we need to stand with all people, and that's not what this is.
And we're going to talk more about your ceasefire resolution
Yes.
after the break, but I do want to ask this question. So you have painted AIPAC as this right-wing extremist group, yet
Yes.
AIPAC has supported people like Hakeem Jeffries, who has endorsed you in this race, and President Biden. So is it really fair to say that this group is consistently like supporting right-wing Republicans when they have boosted a lot of liberal Democrats?
Absolutely, because first of all, they are the biggest funder for Democrats. They are also the biggest funder for Republicans, and they support more Republicans. And also their work in a Democratic district, they're looking to try to put someone in that leans more to the right, and so that makes a difference. So they don't care about. Like in this race, they don't care about how much I've done to help support our unhoused community members. They don't care about the money that we were able to get to places like Epworth to help our children and youth in need. They don't care about any of that. They don't care about that we were able to get millions of dollars for St. Louis Housing Authority to make sure that our seniors had access to broadband. They don't care about those things. They care about making sure that they get someone who leans more to the right. And I say that because the mega donors, the same mega donors that are trying to elect Donald Trump are the same donors that are supporting Wesley Bell in this race through AIPAC. And let me say this too, Jason. AIPAC supports over 100 insurrectionist members of Congress. These are the election deniers that believe that Donald Trump actually won the U.S. Presidential race back in 2020. And so they support over 100 of those folks, and they support over 200 anti-abortion lawmakers. So how is that better for St. Louis, someone that believes that scaling the walls of the Capitol was okay? We're going to fund those folks.
But again, they support Hakeem Jeffries,
They
too.
do. They do support Hakeem Jeffries, and that is, to me, that's the cover. We'll support a few of the Democrats. That's the cover. We'll support a few of the Democrats, but our real agenda is to make sure that we're getting our Republicans that are pushing our agenda into these seats.
We need to take a quick break, but we'll continue our conversation with Congresswoman Cori Bush when we come back. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We now return to our conversation with Congresswoman Cori Bush, a Democrat who represents Missouri's 1st Congressional District. So, in a press conference on Thursday, President Biden said the only way for a lasting peace is what's known as a two-state solution, which results in the establishment of an independent Palestinian state that is majority Muslim alongside an independent Israeli state that is majority Jewish. Do you share the desire among many of your Democratic colleagues, including the president, for a two-state solution?
So I have not come out public either way with a one-state or a two-state solution. I believe that the Israelis should be safe and have a place to call home, as well as Palestinians should be safe and have a place to call home. And the reason why I have not come out publicly with a statement on that is because, for one, to be a lawmaker in another country, telling people in another country, this is how your country or your land should be divided. I don't believe that is my place as the St. Louis congressperson, but I believe that making sure that there is safety for Israelis and Palestinians, and there is a place where there is liberation and freedom for both is key.
I do want to talk about your Jewish constituents because there's a large amount, and I have not talked to every Jewish person in the 1st District. I want to make that clear, and there's very different opinions.
Yes.
But we got a listener question. We got a lot of listener questions on this topic, including this one from former Creve Coeur City Councilwoman Heather Silverman. Bush's actions have caused many Jews to understand that their congresswoman does not love them. Given that showing her constituents love was so much a part of her first campaign, what does she intend, if anything, to do about that? So I'll follow up on that question. What would you say to your Jewish constituents, even ones who are progressive and who have supported you in the past, who contend you didn't do enough to provide comfort to them after Hamas's October 7th attack?
So I will say that I would love for them to be more specific, because one thing I've had Many, many conversations with our Jewish community members. And it's just like in any community. You can talk with 75 of these folks, and then people will still say you didn't talk to this person, or you didn't talk to this group, or you didn't. So for us, we were talking to those that reached out to us. We were talking to those that we had contact with. We were putting out information. And then also one thing that was happening was people were saying, oh, well, she didn't do this because on social media it said that she didn't do this. Well, they said, oh, well, she doesn't support releasing the hostages. I actually co-sponsored the bill to release the hostages. She didn't condemn Hamas. I condemned Hamas over and over again. But what I did not do was sign on to legislation that were Republican bills that were meant to cause that were meant to fuel anti-Palestinian hate. What we were saying was we can condemn Hamas and also care about the lives of the Palestinian people and not want to see them harmed as well. So that's what we were saying. And so when they say, well, oh, you didn't do enough to support, I was talking to different rabbis saying, hey, what do you need? They were saying, we need protection. We need more protection at our synagogues. We were saying, okay, well, let's work to try to make sure that you have that. We were having those conversations, and I just think that is untrue. But in any other thing, whether it's dealing with housing or anything else, people will tell us what they need. Just you have to tell us what you need.
So I want to shift to abortion rights, which is something that you have been very forthright during your tenure in Congress. Aaron on X asks, where does she get her info about Wesley Bell not supporting women's right to choose? Because Bell said on the show, his position on abortion rights is not that much different than yours. Where the tangible difference on policy?
So the thing is this. First of all, let's start with the fact that Wesley Bell was the campaign manager for a Republican who was trying to flip this particular seat against Lacy Clay. That he was the Republican campaign manager for, I believe his name was Mark Byrne.
Yes, I think he's a former Ferguson City Councilman.
Yes, former Ferguson City Council member. So he was his campaign manager, and this person was working. He wanted to have a constitutional amendment to ban abortion. His work was to ban abortion in Missouri. And Wesley Bell felt that it was okay to work to help flip this seat to red. He wanted to flip this seat to Republican, this particular one. And so the thing is, if you are supporting and working for someone who wants a constitutional amendment to ban abortion in Missouri, then how do you have the same stance as I do? Dating back to then, how do we have the same stance? Because the thing is this, and I know that their spokesperson said that this was just a favor for a friend.
Or you could say, maybe his opinions changed since 2006. Like, I'll bring this up. Like, your dad supported Lacy Clay in 2000, and I'm sure he didn't support Lacy Clay in 2018 or 2020.
Exactly. And so people can evolve. I've evolved in some areas, but when later on he continued to support Republicans as far as donating to Dean Plocker, who is the Missouri Speaker of the House, he who, by the way, is listed on the website as an election denier. But not only that, currently right now, just as I said, when you are being supported by the mega donors pushing you, the biggest group that's pushing you, that is backing you, they support over 200 anti-abortion lawmakers. But then you say, I'm the same with you. No, you're not. Because you know what? I introduced bills after Roe fell, when the Dobbs decision came down. I introduced bills to make sure that the medication abortion bill was able to be accessed throughout the country. I introduced bills for wraparound services for people who need to access abortion care and everything that goes along with that. We did that work. I was with Secretary Becerra, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, when Dobbs fell. I was sitting with him, abortion providers, storytellers, community leaders, sitting trying to figure out what we will do for Missouri if that decision came down, and in which it did right there during that time, during that conversation, actually. As someone who has had abortions, I've been public about that. I spoke at one of our congressional hearings, speaking about what happened with me and how we're working to make sure that people across this country can access abortion. And so when Missouri, number one, we were the first state to lose access to abortion, and to then feel like it's okay. We have abortion on the ballot right now. So to feel like it's okay to be supported by anti-abortion lawmakers, no, we are not the same.
So I do want to ask this because I think it's going to certainly be brought up in the next couple of weeks. You have faced some heat because your campaign has spent money on security, including for your husband. Now, before I ask this question, we have talked interpersonally, even before you were elected, about the threats to you. And I imagine that they've only intensified since you've become an elected official.
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
So I want to make that clear that the Congresswoman and I have discussed this topic at length. What do you make of the argument from people that are not fans of yours that think it's hypocritical to support the defund the police movement while paying a lot for campaign security?
Right. And so they're two totally different things. That is just being uninformed or purposely ignorant. Because defunding the police is not about taking police from the people. It's not about making sure that, about removing safety from the people. It is about, again, I will say, we don't need to invest the dollars, the St. Louis taxpayer dollars, into militarized weaponry. Take that money and put it into the social safety net. Me having security that is paid for through the campaign is so that I can stay alive to do the work. It is not just something that I think could happen. We have had so many death threats that have come into our office. But not only that, like you said, Jason, you and I have had these conversations before I ever entered Congress. I actually, at one point, went to the FBI and sat and had an interview with them and gave them all of the information of all the attempts made on my life, not just things that people have said online, attempts made on my life. And actually, one of the people who threatened me online a few months before I was sworn in actually was there at the insurrection and is currently in jail for assaulting a police officer. And so these threats are real. We have had the threats since I've been in the seat have been so tremendous, so much so to at one point we had to close our office, our St. Louis office. We had to evacuate it and close it for a full week.
So one more question on this point, and I want to make this very clear. It is not illegal for a campaign to pay family members to be on the campaign. In fact, Lacy Clay paid his sister to do a lot of work on his campaign, and Russ Carnahan also paid his wife. But I want to ask you this directly. Can you assure voters that you have never used money from your congressional office to pay your husband for any security work?
From my official office?
Yes.
Absolutely not. Never once. My husband has only been paid through the campaign 100%. And we have followed every applicable law to make sure that has been handled appropriately. And the reason as far as the FEC is concerned, family members can work on the campaign as long as they are providing an actual service. They are doing the actual job. And that has been investigated by the Office of Congressional Ethics. It was a full investigation, and the decision came back unanimously that there was no wrongdoing.
Cori Bush is the Congresswoman for Missouri's 1st Congressional District. You can listen to Prosecutor Bell's appearance on the Politically Speaking Hour at stlpr.org. We plan on having former Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal on the program in the coming weeks. Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Joining us now to discuss our interview with Congresswoman Cori Bush is Sarah Kellogg, St. Louis Public Radio's State House and Politics reporter. Sarah, welcome back.
Hi, Jason.
What were your takeaways from my interview with Bush?
I think one of the biggest things is that she really, for you, had answers to the concerns from constituents, especially talking about, you spoke a lot about the Israel-Palestine, Israel-Hamas issue, and she had a lot of answers for that. I think she really backed up her statements, which I think was interesting to me, especially when it comes to why this is becoming an issue and why there has been so much opposition to her on that, why she does have two opponents. So I think that was an interesting takeaway for me.
This is not the first time Bush has faced a challenge for re-election, but this one feels a lot more substantial, even though I would say State Senator Stephen Roberts had money and support from some Democratic officials. Why do you think this race is different than 2022?
We talked a little bit about this with the Bell interview, and it's less about her opponents more than it is about Bush herself and the circumstances. And so you're looking at Israel Hamas. You're looking at the investigation into her spending, which you guys also addressed. You're talking about just kind of she's had more time to be a congresswoman, and so therefore she's getting more critiques about that.
So we talked about this in the interview, but my view is if Bush retains her support in heavily African-American parts of the district, she wins. So I want to give some context. She averaged around 73% of the vote in 5 St. Louis wards with large black populations. Now, we don't know the answer to this. We won't until August 7th. But do you think the onslaught of money that we talked about will be effective at reducing those margins?
I'm just not sure, because ultimately she is representing her constituents, which I think, at least if you're looking at the white progressives that are in her district, they're probably agreeing with her on her issues of Israel-Palestine. And as we talked about, we don't think that black voters care as much about this issue. So I don't know if that money, if it is on those particular issues, is going to sway people that much.
But she did mention, and I think she's correct on this, that the ads that AIPAC-like groups are not focusing on Israel, Gaza. They're focusing on her votes, which, by the way, her votes are totally fair game to criticize. And I think that even she would say that. But I think that's the question that I have is that going to move black voters away from her?
I don't see it. I think that you're right. If that was such a big issue, then why aren't there being as many ads run about it? And then why is that the issue? More on her votes and maybe her support and how the money that she's brought in. So I think that there isn't a clear answer as to why she's being primary other than Israel, but then why are the ads not there?
As much as I would like to not think about Joe Biden and the presidential race, like my wife is really sick of me looking at my phone and all that.
Yeah, same here.
What do you make of Bush's comments about Biden? Because there's been a lot of members of the Congressional Black Caucus who have really supported him, but she's not willing to say whether or not yet she wants him to stay or go.
I mean, if she says she's listening to her constituents and they're wanting him to not be the nominee, wanting them to step down, as she said in the interview, I think that it's interesting that she hasn't come out with a comment yet, though. I think it is interesting that she's kind of waiting on this and really isn't committed either way. Even when you asked her, do you think he can win? She didn't really answer that question.
Well, I've listened to a lot of podcasts, more than I really care to admit. And I think the fear among Democrats is, even if they think that Biden is a better candidate than, say, Vice President Kamala Harris, apparently privately nobody thinks Biden can win anymore, which is, again, something we won't know until after November. And there is a new poll out from NPR showing he's up by 2 points over Trump. So who knows?
I think it's smart of Bush to say that she's listening to her constituents and hasn't come out on that opinion yet. And maybe, if she gets more calls, it'll eventually, cause her to make a statement. But for now, not really a commitment yet.
So out of all the races in the St. Louis region, I think this is going to be the nastiest and most contentious. Do you think the outcome here could have an impact on what happens to Democrats in the fall?
No, because I think the matter of abortion is a bigger deal than this particular race. I think that Democrats are going to, whether their opinions, Democrats or Republicans who would also be in support of that initiative, I think that's a bigger issue than what would happen. I think that's a bigger proponent than a deterrent of the race between Bell and Chappelle-Nadal and Bush.
Yeah, and I think it's possible that there could be some hurt feelings and that could lower turnout in St. Louis and St. Louis County. But again, if the abortion measure makes the ballot, those hard feelings may dissipate because those voters want to legalize abortion.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there.
I basically just restated what you said.
You did.
Sarah Kellogg is St. Louis Public Radio's State House and Politics reporter. She'll join us later in the show. When we come back, we'll talk with Democratic U.S. Senate hopeful Karla May. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Missouri State Senator Karla May is used to defying political expectations. Throughout her time in Missouri state politics, the St. Louis Democrat defeated an incumbent state senator, the husband of a future mayor, and a sitting state representative in her elections to the Senate and House. She even defeated then St. Louis Treasurer Tashara Jones in a committeewoman race. Now May is facing perhaps her biggest primary challenge to date, successfully countering a well-funded and well-organized effort from Independence resident Lucas Kunce to take on GOP U.S. Senator Josh Hawley in November. And while Kunce gathered up a slew of top-level labor and public official endorsements, May isn't walking into the August 6th primary without support of her own. Joining us now is State Senator Karla May, who represents portions of St. Louis and St. Louis County in the Missouri Senate. Senator May, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, as we mentioned in the introduction, you're an astute political operator, especially in the city of St. Louis. Why do you believe you can parlay electoral success in a fairly small geographic area to a statewide contest?
Well, thank you. I thank you for that question. So basically, people keep asking, what's the path to victory here? So I've been in the legislature 14 years. And while I've been in the legislature, I've had many accomplishments. I have a proving track record of getting things done. And most people around the state know me because I've traveled around the state while performing my duties as an elected legislative senator and as a House, a representatives member. I've traveled around the state performing my duties, and I've been on television a lot, when we're in debate about certain issues. So people are aware of my name, and I feel like if I can get my information to them and let them know about my record, I can be successful. I will be successful in this race.
We'll talk more about the dynamics of this race near the end of our conversation, but let's talk about issues because people probably care more about what you think on the issues than the horse race. If you were in the Senate and a bill came before you to provide military aid to Israel, would you be supportive or opposed to this, and why?
So I would be supportive of providing military support to Israel because, first of all, Israel is our ally in that context. But let me give you a broader context. So, we have to protect our interests, the United States, around the world. And if I go back into my past a little, I was a, ROTC student when I started at St. Louis University.
I had no idea about that.
I know. And so I took a lot of courses in, politics and policy around the, around the world, around the globe. And we align based on our interests and our democracies and the way we kind of govern. And if you look at what's happening around the world, you have democracies up against dictatorships. And if you take a look at what's happening with Ukraine right now, it's a democracy, and you see Putin trying to move forward in that democracy. If you put the chess pieces on the board, you will understand what's really happening. So I support our allies. And, that doesn't mean that our allies are not doing something, we can't call them out on.
Well, that was going to be my next question. A lot of Democratic voters in Missouri and elsewhere have expressed shock and outrage over the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, and they blame Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government for the continuing violence. So why should Democratic officials continue to support Israel with this context in mind?
Well, let me tell you something. It's like we can support our allies and then also call them out on what they're doing wrong. So if there's a problem with the way Netanyahu is handling the war, we have a right to call them out on that. But you still don't abandon your allies in the middle of a battle.
And do you think he is? Are you going to call him out? Like, would you call him out right now for doing a lot of bad things?
Absolutely. I would call him out and let him know, that he's doing things, that are contrary. Everybody cares about life. I don't care who you're talking about. I don't care whose lives it is. People care about, women and children that are dying. But at the same time, when the United States got bombed by 9/11, no one questioned the United States approach in going into Iraq. And
You mean Afghanistan?
well, we went both places.
We did, but right after 9/11, we went into Afghanistan, and then we went into Iraq in 2003. So I want to make sure I understand you correctly.
Yes. So, yes. So no one would question, our approach or, why we, responded the way we responded.
Because I was in college in 2003. A lot of countries did question us going into Iraq. I just want to make that clear. But Afghanistan, I think Barbara Lee, the Congresswoman from California, was the only person to vote against that, from my understanding. But you mentioned Ukraine earlier. We talked during filing day about you are supportive of continuing to provide military assistance from the United States to Ukraine. But some Republicans have questioned whether that support should be open-ended and it should be dependent on the aid actually achieving successful results. Are there any metrics you would look at which would prompt you to maybe think twice about supporting Ukraine in the future if you're elected to the U.S. Senate?
Let me tell you, when you're elected to office as a legislature, you're going to look at every bill and what's in those bills, and you're also going to look at the metrics that are attached to the bills. Because every piece of legislation or everything that you're doing, whether you're appropriating money, you always look at the metrics, and are those metrics achievable by the entities that you're appropriating the money to? That's just smart legislating, and I've done that for 14 years as being on the appropriations and budget for 13 years. While I was in the legislature. So absolutely. So you don't blindly vote for anything. You're going to have to evaluate every piece of legislation. And sometimes you're going to have to say no, even though it's to our allies, or you're going to have to amend some bills. You're going to have to amend some bills that you like, and you're going to have to amend some bills that you don't like in order to make the bill better and make it more meeting the metrics.
On abortion, let's just say you had your way and you were able to craft a bill legalizing abortion everywhere. What would kind of be the parameters? Would you want it to be up to the period that's known as fetal viability, 24, 28 weeks of pregnancy, which was basically what Roe v. Wade was when it was decided, or would you want to do something completely different?
I would, first of all, I think that we're in this conversation about women. Mm-hmm. And let me just be honest with you. I don't think women's decisions or their choice should be questioned. I don't think you should question my faith or my choice to have an abortion. So I think that abortion should be accessible for individuals who need to make that decision, point blank. Now, you want to get into the details. When we're getting into the details, we have to make sure that details in law are not so strenuous that people die. Because right now, you have doctors who are worried about violating the law instead of saving a life of a mother. So I think that people who are trying to legislate this issue or trying to legislate it from their own personal religious perspective. But in my experience with Christ, he said, whosoever will, let him come. So don't question a woman's faith and don't question her choice.
Yeah, I want to just ask a similar question to that. There could be a lot of voters in Missouri who have religious objections to abortion, and they want to essentially transpose those objections into law. What would you say to voters who may consider you in the general election who hear something like that and feel they can't vote for you because you want legal abortion?
Well, like I said, we have in this country, we're taking an oath to support the Constitution. And under the Constitution, you have a freedom of religion. And you can't impose your religious beliefs on other individuals. And I'll stand on that all day long. Now, if we are to codify something in law, I'm not saying that we can't say late-term abortion should not happen. Right? I don't believe in abortion, but at the same time, you can't make a law determining somebody else's choice of what they think should happen with their own bodies. That's where I am, and we have freedom of religion. People have to understand that's the Constitution, and that's where we are.
Well, that is a good segue to my next question, because I've known you for a long time, and your faith is unquestioned. And Senator Hawley recently engendered some controversy when he talked about the concept of Christian nationalism. Here's a quote. "The truth is, Christian nationalism is not a threat to American democracy. Christian nationalism founded American democracy. and it is the best form of democracy yet devised by man, the most just, the most free, the most humane, and praiseworthy. I'm not sure if you listened to the entirety of his comments, but what do you think of the comment I just read to you?
So let me say it this way. We had individuals who founded a country. You got me? And that's why I think God is a, amazing God. Because you had individuals who founded a country. Some of them had slaves, and some of them probably was mistreating their slaves, more than likely. If they was a slave, they was mistreated. Because
Thomas
they was
Jefferson
slaves.
comes to mind,
Absolutely.
to put it mildly.
Yes. And so at the same time, these people, if you read any of the books by Frederick Douglass, he tell you the worst thing he learned was that the people that claimed they were Christians were the worst slave owners. They was the most abusive people. So it's a different thing to have religion and to have a relationship with Christ. Those are two different things. You got me? Because people want to have these things where they impose Christ on you, but you don't have to impose anything if you love people. Love covers a multitude of sin. So if you love people, you don't have to impose anything on him. So that Christian nationalism, where I have to tell you, our country was formed fighting against imposed religion. Basically the Protestant, the Catholic, whatever it was that Europe was trying to impose on the United States, we broke away from that. And that's why in our Constitution it says the freedom of religion. So you have these freedoms, and we have to exercise those freedoms under the Constitution. If you're concerned about somebody else's belief system, and you're a Christian, you need to do the Great Commission. And that is, go ye therefore into all the world and teach and preach the gospel. Because to me, the only thing that's going to change the hearts of man is the word of God. You or a person is not going to be able to influence somebody's decisions. You can't come into my house and I'm hungry and telling me what I need to do in order to become unhungry without meeting my need first, because I'm not going to hear you because I'm hungry.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Fine.
So I asked this question to Congresswoman Bush first, and I guess I'll ask you last for symmetry. There are some Democrats that want Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race after his debate on June 27th. Are you one of those people who feel that the president should step aside?
Absolutely not. I think Joe Biden is our candidate, and I think Joe Biden can win. I will take wisdom over lies any day. And I've been in this legislature, and I've seen the perpetuation of untruths, and those perpetuations of untruths is not good for our democracy. And so I think that Biden can win, and I think that he should stay in the race, because one thing people don't understand is this. You still have to get on the ballot in 50 states. And from now until November, a new candidate still will have to get on the ballot in 50 states. And the rules are different in every state. And there are deadlines that probably have already passed and different conditions that can't be met. You got to look it up.
Yeah, I think it depends on the state. But since the Democrats haven't nominated a presidential candidate yet, I'm not sure if they apply unless he drops out afterward. But I don't know the rules for every state. But in the last minute, why do you think he can win? Because if you listen to, we were talking about this with Sarah, a lot of Democrats don't feel he can win anymore, and they feel like his age is such an albatross around him that he's never going to be able to recover from what happened in that debate.
Well, if you take an hour and a half, you're using an hour and a half of conversation over 4 years of accomplishments and legislative experience. I'm not saying that President Biden is not an aged man, but I'll take wisdom and age and a few missteps in oral over somebody who has no substance, that lies repetitively, that also has been accused of rape, has been convicted of all of these crimes, and has no remorse and no repentive, sorry, nothing, and you want me to vote for him. I have over 87,000 or more individuals or 87 million or more individuals that have felons in this country that cannot vote. Now the Republicans, you're asking me to vote for a convicted felon when you won't even allow the ones that we've already released that can serve their time to vote? Come on now, let's stop the hypocrisy.
State Senator Karla May is a Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. We're working with Democrat Lucas Kunce to come on the Politically Speaking Hour before the August 6th primary. Senator, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And we're pleased to welcome back St. Louis Public Radio's Sarah Kellogg. Sarah, what did you think of our interview with Senator May?
I think Senator May is drawing a lot of what she's learned from her work in the legislature to her campaign, showing kind of her dedication to both the St. Louis area and also just kind of her tenacity as a lawmaker and why that would translate to the Senate.
Yeah, we didn't get into it because I really was going down the issue rabbit hole, which I think is better. She's been outraised by Lucas Kunce by a huge margin, but she does have a lot of support. St. Louis Mayor Tashara Jones, who I mentioned in the introduction, endorsed her, and there are a lot of other officials that are pretty enthusiastic about her campaign. Do you think that she can overcome the money advantage?
I mean, I think she has before, if I'm incorrect, right, on her first Senate
She has.
race. Yeah, so I think there's a precedent there. And I think that if her presence in the Senate is very St. Louis focused, and very much you can tell that she is going to stand up for the constituents of her district and in St. Louis in general. Whatever bills that come up that affect St. Louis, she's going to stand up and talk about it. And I think that will translate well into St. Louis, and it could go beyond the St. Louis area. I think there is a question of whether or not her name gets into different areas of Democratic voters that aren't St. Louis, but I do think that she can overcome that if she wants.
We've been covering a lot of primary races for St. Louis Public Radio collectively, and despite the fact that the Senate race is probably going to be the marquee matchup of the general election, this Kunce-May primary matchup has flown a little bit under the radar. It hasn't been really contentious or nasty like the first district race. First of all, do you agree with that? And how do you think the fact this race isn't that contentious could affect the winner's chances in November?
I think it won't affect November. I think it's just showing that they genuinely probably agree on things and more or less like each other. You haven't seen really those big attack ads, and that doesn't, cause news or buzz and flash. And so, I do think really they are similar on the issues. I don't think it's going to impact November because, as we talked before, I think abortion's going to be on the ballot most likely, and Hawley is such a big figure, whether, Republicans support him, Democrats don't like him. I think that's big enough that it's not going to really detract and affect the winner's chances either way.
Most national prognosticators believe Hawley is favored in his reelection bid, probably because Missouri is Republican-leaning. Donald Trump's going to win the state. But with a measure to legalize abortion, as you've mentioned a couple times, is it possible Republicans like him could face tougher races than usual?
I think it could be a tougher race. I'm not sure on the bigger marquee races that you're going to look at the top of the ballot, but I think when we're getting to more local elections, when it comes to state races, when it comes to state Senate races, I think that's way more effective to, I think Republicans are going to face a tougher challenge than they would in other years.
I think it really depends on a lot of things, including whether national groups feel either May or Kunce are viable. And I hate to put so much weight into what outside groups think about, but in U.S. Senate races and House races too, it is so critical. If you don't get that support and money and organization, it's kind of like an implicit suggestion that you're not going to win and it's not worth our time. So I guess it's going to be, it remains to be seen whether that happens in the fall.
I think that Hawley is a big enough name in national politics, whether you're from Missouri or not, that I think any opponent to him is probably going to get quite a bit of support.
Oh, I expect a lot of national reporters to make a lot of trips to Missouri in the fall simply because of Hawley's profile. And also, I think there'll be a lot of speculation that if he wins, he may run for president in 2028 because Donald Trump cannot run for a third term. And it's going to be an open seat because, Sarah, I've always wanted to travel across Iowa, and my grandpa's from there, so I can go see.
We're going to have a great road trip, Jason.
Sarah Kellogg is St. Louis Public Radio State House and Politics reporter. Sarah, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. You got it.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wysentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich, and our production intern is Roche Hemmings.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.